This is Job Seeking Skills Video 12 Challenging Interviews. I'm Keith O'Malley, Career Advisor with Law Society of Ireland. Hi. This video is one of a collection of 12 that looks at the whole area of job seeking skills, and it's one of the final 3 videos that are focused on interviews. So in video 10 we looked at preparing for interviews, in video 11 we looked at attending and succeeding at interviews, and now in this video, video 12, we're going to look at challenging interviews. There is a booklet provided with this video and you can access it through the hyperlink below on YouTube, and it contains detailed information on competency-based interviews. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at 4 different types of challenging interviews. We're going to look at competency interviews, also known as competency-based interviews. We're going to look at telephone interviews. We're going to look at interviews where you are required to make a presentation, and we're going to look at interviews that are conducted by a poor interviewer. We're going to go through each of these one by one over the course of the rest of this video. So we'll start with competency interviews. Competency interviews, also known as competency-based interviews, are a style of interview that have been around about 20 years and are used mainly by large organizations and especially by public sector employers. They like them because it's quite a non-discriminatory way of interviewing. It reduces bias, and it's also very useful for selecting from candidates with mixed experience. What the employer does is they identify a number of competencies that they consider important for the job, and they then ask questions around these competencies. They also, to a lesser extent, identify some motivations and commitments that they consider important for the job, and ask some further questions also about these motivations and commitments. So at a competency interview, if you're being asked, for instance, about multitasking, the question will be phrased in much the following way. The ability to multitask is an important competency for this job. Can you outline a situation for us when you are required to multitask? You will tend to be asked about this same question about 5 or 6 times, about 5 or 6 different competencies. You'll also be asked about motivations and commitments, and for instance, if you're being asked about maybe ambition, the question will be structured in much the following way. A high level of ambition is required in this job. Can you outline an occasion when you demonstrated a high level of ambition? The nice thing about competency-based interviews is that the question is always much the same, and also you can quite normally identify what the competencies are, what the motivations are before you attend interview, and do a lot of preparation in terms of preparing your stories and get the common mistakes that people make in competency interviews is not using stories to demonstrate the skill. So if they're asked about a particular competency, multitasking, they talk and they philosophize about it, but they don't tell an actual story. Using we rather than I. The story should be about you. Even if there are other people involved in whatever your story is based around, use I rather than we in as far as you can. Not providing enough detail, you need to go into a good bit of detail with regard to your story. Worst of all is admitting that you don't have any experience in the area that they're inquiring about. Telephone interviews are something that a lot of people think are, quite a breeze. There's something that you can do in bed, maybe have a cigarette at the same time, and nothing is further from the truth. A telephone interview requires a lot of preparation beforehand. In particular, when you go through a telephone interview, the only thing that the employer is going to base their judgment on is your voice and how well you can summarize matters and how well you can present yourself in very succinct way. So you need to do a lot of preparation beforehand. You need to handle yourself well during the telephone conversation, which quite often will can involve more than one person, and maybe 2 or 3 people who are based in different locations, and at the end of the interview, you also need to be able to know how to finish up, find out what the next stage is, and what's going to happen next. And then it's a good idea at the end, after the telephone interview ends, that you follow up with an email correspondence. Some tips we would have with regard to telephone interviews: stand rather than sit, because it facilitates a higher level of energy, and your lungs are that much more open and you're going to sound more powerful. Also smile. If you smile, that will be reflected in your tone of voice, which is what is going to impact on the person at the other end of the telephone line. It's a good idea to repeat questions, especially if you're not quite sure what you're being asked, but it's a good idea to repeat questions almost all the time. Be very careful not to interrupt the interviewer or interviewers. The best telephone interviews quite often involve the interviewer doing a good deal more talking than you, the interviewee. So let the interviewer talk, and when it comes to you having a say, summarize as best you can what you want to say, and don't be long-winded in your answers. Increasingly, people are being asked to make presentations as part of a selection process. This quite normally happens at second interview stage, and the normal format is somebody is asked to come along, make a presentation on a particular matter for about 10 minutes, and then they will be asked questions about their presentation for another 20 minutes or so, and then the interview will progress into a more standard type interview. What we would strongly recommend you do if you're asked to make a presentation is to do a PowerPoint presentation. Quite simply, people who do PowerPoint presentations rather than a presentation using a flip chart or something like that do better. So do a presentation. Try and ensure that your slides are as uncluttered as possible. It's a good idea not to have more than 3 points on a slide, and in terms of words, keep words to a minimum as well. It is unfortunate if you find yourself at interview in front of a poor interviewer, and there's a range of different kind of tactics that you can take depending on the problem that you're faced with. Sometimes an interviewer is inclined to talk too much. If this happens, you quite simply have to interrupt. You have to say, yeah, that's very interesting, my own experience is, and you need to barge in and get your point across. Another problem can be that the interviewer is quite distracted and maybe getting regularly interrupted. If this happens, there comes a point that it's a good idea to say, look, you seem to be under a lot of pressure. Maybe it would suit if we stopped now and I came back at another time. Sometimes the interviewer is not up to it, and what we're talking about here is they don't know the right questions to ask. They don't know how to properly tease out whether you've got the kind of experience and whether you've got the kind of fit that they're looking for. If this happens, you have to consider taking charge of the interview. In these kind of circumstances, what you do is you say something like, would it help if I talked through my experience with regard to such and such an area, or would you be interested if I talked through what I did during my training contract, that kind of thing. So what we've done in terms of challenging interviews in this video is we've looked at competency interviews, we've looked at telephone interviews, we've looked at interviews where you need to make a presentation, and interviews that are conducted by a poor performer. That's the end of this video, video 12, and it's also the end of this collection of videos.